NASA's Johnson Space Center, Executive Director of the Space Frontier Foundation, Chairman of ProSpace, and award-winning Director of its annual March Storm Congressional Lobbying event, and is Managing Partner at Exodus Consulting Group. With his diverse experience and master's degree in future studies, Jeff brings a unique, insightful perspective to space exploration, settlement, commercial development, and its economic value. If you'd like to learn more, visit him at his website, www.jeffkrukin.com. Take it away, Jeff.
Did you say take away, Jeff? Oh. People are usually saying take away, Jeff. All right, well, here we are at the last event of the day before the most important event of the day. Sorry, second most important. The competition is the most important. And that would be the reception. So, but that doesn't mean I'm going to go any faster than I normally would. So I really want to take advantage of the panelists that we have. Let me say just a couple of words about all three of them. Dr. Sean Casey. I met Sean in June. I met John yesterday, and I met Jeremy 10 minutes ago. So I'm going to have to read from some notes here. So Dr. Casey, co-founder and managing director of the Silicon Valley Space Center, which is a business accelerator for new space entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley. He has over 2 decades of experience as an airborne astronomer. His work has been recognized as an example of NASA's goal for more efficient and cost-effective methodologies for instrument design and construction. Turning to Jeremy Conrad. Isn't this in order of the way you're sitting? God, this is really confusing. So he is founding partner at Lemnos Labs. Now, as I go through this, also recognize the different industries that are represented by these 3 people, and yet we're all here talking about NewSpace. Founding partner at Lemnos Labs, a hardware startup incubator based in San Francisco. Lemnos invests in early-stage companies ranging from aerospace and robotics to consumer electronics. Prior to founding Lemnos, Jeremy spent 5 years as an officer in the United States Air Force, working on weapons-grade lasers for missile defense. Oh, I want to talk to you. And he has a mechanical engineering degree from MIT. And turning to Dr. John Cumbers, I'm sorry, I want to make sure I said that correctly. Right. Received his PhD in the graduate program in molecular biology, cell biology, and biochemistry at Brown University, Providence, Rhode Island. He's been working at NASA Ames since 2008, looking at the mechanisms of radiation resistance and cold tolerance in Antarctic cyanobacteria. He also runs SynBioBeta, an activity hub for synthetic biology startup companies. So with that introduction, here's how we're going to do this panel. Sean has got a couple of slides and opening remarks, and then John has a single slide and some opening remarks. Jerry has 0 slides. There's that again, and some opening remarks. And then after that, I've got a couple of questions in mind that I'd like to pose to each of you, and then open it up to the audience. So with that, I'd like to ask Sean, if you would please, to come up. Make sure your lapel mic's on, by the way. It's a very clever label on-off switch.
There you go. Okay, great. So thank you very much. I'm the Managing Director of the Silicon Valley Space Center. We're here in the Bay Area. We're generally located over at the Hacker Dojo. Silicon Valley Space Center is also a member of the Commercial Spaceflight Federation, and in that capacity, I'm a member of the Suborbital Applications Research Group, which I see as a big developing area for suborbital spaceflight, X-Core, Virgin Galactic, those things. Our moniker in this program is launching new space entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley, and we have several of them competing in this competition, and some that wanted to compete in this competition, but aren't here. So I congratulate everybody that presented today. It's really an arduous process to have to go through all that, but and I'd like to thank Stanford Student Space Initiative for inviting me here today. So this is a slide I presented at the PayPal Galactic rollout, and to me it was interesting because of all the companies that are represented, and these are companies that some of them have been around for over a decade, SpaceX and Orbital, but a number of others are new entries. And some of them are, I find to be very exciting. Golden Spike is being headed up by Alan Stern, who was just here the end of last week, giving a presentation at Stanford. And Alan Stern, in my mind, is doing Apollo 18, 19, and 20, and returning people back to the moon. And that's a very aggressive program. And somebody like Alan Stern, who was serving as the deputy administrator, as the head of SMD of NASA, is probably the right person to go into a program like that. But if we look at how this has developed over the last 5 years, we see a lot of companies that weren't on this chart before. Some of them, ones that people have talked about, Cosmogia, NanoSatisfy is there, along with some other new companies like Base to Space. I thought it was kind of interesting when they edited this chart, they stuck Base to Space right between SpaceX and Orbital. So that was one of the companies that came out of the Space Startup Weekend that I'll talk about next. We were founded in February of 2011. Here in September of 2011, we did an event at the MIT Stanford Venture Lab called Space is Not for Billionaires Anymore. That video is online and you can look at it, but it was only 2 years ago that happened. And so if I look from 2 years to today, look at all the progress we've made. At Silicon Valley Space Center, we've also worked with entrepreneurs to engage the NASA Flight Opportunities Program. We did some flight on the zero-G vehicle. And in the last 9 months, we've done a number of workshops that I show here. One, which I really liked, was a branded workshop with XCOR on citizen science and how educators and entrepreneurs can use vehicles like the Lynx 2 to prove out their microgravity technologies. A workshop that we did at the Hacker Dojo had 100+ people. It was a great networking event. It focused on XCOR, and to me, it was a great. It was fun to do because you didn't have a lot of people fighting for, hey, what about me? And with different companies. We just came out of another workshop we did with Casis that was this weekend over at Atmel. The great thing about that was that Atmel was a supporter of space. Atmel makes the Arduino processor, and they opened up their office facilities for us to use for this meeting. We partnered with Casis, the Center for the Advancement of Science in Space, for the non-governmental organization that heads up the ISS research lab. And so that was an opportunity for entrepreneurs to engage facilities in low Earth orbit for building out their technologies, whether it's bio or materials or stem cell type research. So videos for that workshop will be available online. And then one of the other events we did during the summer, and both John and Jeremy have participated in some of our events, but the Space Startup Weekend, which I really enjoyed, where entrepreneurs can come together and build out companies. The Base to Space company that I featured in one of the other slides was one of the companies that won that competition. And a couple of weeks ago, I was down in Texas giving a talk about the activities that we're doing for space in Silicon Valley. And people in Texas are like, gee, we'd like to bring some of that stuff down here. How do we do that? So I think we're, here at Silicon Valley, we seem to be holding our own and making good progress on that. One of the things that I'm very keen on that's coming up is a bid that we're doing for that NASA aims for Moffett Field through the GSA. And if you're an aerospace company and you're interested in this, please let me know. This is for the airfield, and we're basically trying to serve this developing space community through the acquisition of the airfield for use as an airfield plus as an incubator and as office space and lab space for the Bay Area. So this is a proposal which is we're sending in on the 20th, and if you're interested, please let me know. And in the end, I have one comment about companies. And this is a story I like to tell of, I went to Hertz. I had some problem with my car and needed to go rent a car. And they said, hey, have you heard about our Hertz 24/7? I'm like, hey, what's that about? And they're like, well, you just show up with a dongle and you can kind of rent a car on short order. And I'm like, oh, it's like Zipcar. And like, how many people here in the Bay Area, how many people are familiar with Zipcar? And then how many people are familiar with the fact that Zipcar was purchased last year for about $400 million, or close to $500 million as an acquisition. and then as a response to Avis's acquisition of Zipcar, now Hertz and Enterprise have comparable offerings. And to me, this is how entrepreneurship works. There's also, what everyone remembers, all the stories about why are you going to be Zipcar? How are you going to disrupt this market that includes all these big rental car companies? And in NewSpace, I believe this is what we're about. We need to successfully demonstrate commercial space, we need to have a return on investment. We need to be building companies created by entrepreneurs and disrupting the existing players. Because the existing players, when those companies are successful, hopefully they'll acquire those companies. There'll be a payout for investors, and this is pretty much how the new space industry should function. So with that, I'll just turn it over to you, Jeff.
Sean, thanks very much. So at this point, I'd like to ask. Please.
So I just wanted to display one slide, which I think talks about a new potential market opportunity that space entrepreneurs should be aware of. So it's not particularly about incubation, but I'm happy to discuss topics on incubation. We talked about revenue and return on investment, and on the left-hand side, you can see the cost of a single person in space. You can see the cost in two terms. The first is the mass, and the second is the dollar value of that mass. And the dollar value is calculated from a very low estimate of the cost to launch to the ISS per kilogram of mass, of about $5,000 per kilogram. The true value is probably, or the true cost is probably nearer to $10,000 or $20,000 if you look at even the lowest provider, which is the Dragon capsule at the moment. But even on this really low estimate, if you add up everything that a human needs to survive in space, which is about a kilogram of oxygen, about half a kilogram of food, water, about 4 kilograms of water. The total for all of that, the food, the oxygen, and the water is about 5 kilograms. If you multiply that by the cost per kilogram, it's about $27,000 per person per day in space. That doesn't include any of the washing water, which adds up to about 25 kilograms. The total for all of that is about $164,000 per person in space. That's just to survive all the inputs that you need and to wash. We're recycling about 85% of that at the moment, which is not a bad number, but that means there's still 15% of that water, or 15% of $164,000 that's sitting on the table. So I think these offer real opportunities for entrepreneurship, for innovation in sustainability, and SpaceX is taking care of launch. I think Bigelow's taking care of habitation. I don't think that habitation on planetary surfaces is going to be a big problem. I think the next frontier is going to be sustainability, and how do we survive there, and how do we stay there, and how do we reuse the resources that we already have there. Now if you look on the other side in terms of the outputs, number one on that chart is carbon dioxide. If I'm in space, if I'm on Earth, wherever I am, the food I eat is oxidized from the oxygen that I breathe in, and the carbon dioxide that I breathe out is a kilogram. Kilogram of CO2 per person per day in space. This is the thing that we're not doing very well at the moment in terms of NASA on the space station, because for every kilogram of CO2 that I breathe out, 1/3 of that is vented out the side of the ISS as methane. So if you now look at a dollar value of kilogram, a dollar value of a kilogram of CO2, it's about $5,000. If you look at 1/3 of that being methane, about 333 grams per person per day. Over the total lifespan, a year on the space station with 8 people is about $3.5 million worth of methane that's just being vented into space at the moment. So putting dollar values on these numbers, which NASA traditionally doesn't really like to do, you can see exactly the inputs and the outputs and the possibility for revenue if we can start fixing that CO2 or methane back into something useful. It's useful in orbit, it's useful on the ISS, but now think about Elon's colony on Mars or Golden Spike's people on the moon, and then let's think about resources in terms of how we can recycle those and provide revenue and profit back to the investors in your startup. Thanks.
John, thank you. Before you take the slide down, I'm saying this tongue in cheek, but yet just to generate a little bit of thought. The first thing that occurred to me when I looked at this is a large percentage of the cost that is associated with washing, right? So if we can figure out how to get a huge number of handy wipes up there at a low cost and tell the astronauts to wash every third day, then NASA could clearly get by on a smaller budget. So, how do you address the washing cost?
And we're not addressing it. We're not washing any clothes at the moment. It's just throw them away when they're dirty.
Thank you. Go ahead, Jeremy.
So just to give a little background on kind of me and what Lemnos does, as was mentioned, we invest in early stage hardware companies, and so typically we invest about $100,000, and then we have a warehouse in the city and we work very closely with them. And then when we're done, we actually help them go out and raise. So our first 10 investments, they've gone on to raise about $35 million. So good initial progress, and one of those companies is a space company. It's NanoSatisfy. They've done incredibly well. They actually have 2 birds on the station right now that are about to kick out, and in general, we actually have 2 more drone-related investments. So in general, we love to invest in things that most other people don't kind of consider standard Silicon Valley. What I want to talk about today is just kind of how the venture ecosystem works. So we get about a couple of applications from space companies a month, and a lot of them we have to reject kind of out of hand. And a lot of it comes down to, I think that there's a very discrete way to look at how kind of the Silicon Valley ecosystem works. And the kind of crazy thing to me, we've been doing this for about 2 years, is that there's way more interest to invest in space and aerospace and really high-tech stuff than there are venture investable companies to do so. So to start, I just want to give you a little bit of perspective of how it works. So the biggest problem we find when I look at a space company is they come in and they say, I need to raise $10 million out the gate. It's like, that's not how this game works. So there are a couple instances, and I think the biggest problem is that if you look at 3 or 4 of the biggest kind of known new space companies, SpaceX, Blue Origin, Planetary Resources, they either had a billionaire founder or they found money from like a high net worth individual. And just in general, that doesn't work. So what we actually see is typically we invest 100 grand. And then when we're done with them, our companies go raise between $500,000 and $2.5 million. And then after that, for a Series A, they're going to go raise between $5 and $20 million. And then in a Series B, you can get anywhere between $30 and $80 million. And the important thing to keep in mind through all that is that you have to hit discrete milestones at each of those steps. So if you come to us and you have a new launch vehicle, honestly, I don't know if anyone but Elon and Jeff Bezos could ever do that. Ever. No matter how good your technology is, no one will ever fund it. Because there's no way to fit a new launch vehicle into those discrete chunks of money. So typically what we really like to see, and this is something that I think NanoSatisfy and Cosmoji have done incredibly well, is they had a really disruptive innovation. They needed sub $1 million to build their first really good prototype. They needed sub $5 million to get to space, and then they'll need sub $50 million to get that first constellation up there. And those are the kind of companies that when you're thinking about starting a new space company, and if you want to participate in kind of the venture ecosystem, those are great examples of companies that have had that step function. Another one of our companies, which is it's a drone company, it's called Airware. And, they did this massive Series A, this $10 million Series A from Andreessen Horowitz. But for them, they had working prototypes, they had their first couple of customers, and they'd done that all for less than a couple $1 million. And one thing that I think is really interesting, and one reason I'm really bullish on space startups in general, is that the growth of the suborbital market to validate. So I know that Blue Origin's doing more suborbital stuff. People like Virgin Galactic are really interested in pushing that. And the ability to use that first suborbital flight to either prove that you have initial functionality or that prototype works, that might be that first check mark that the later stage investors need. So if you can get and go prove something in suborbital for less than $5 million, that's how you can unlock that $30, $40 million. You need to maybe do that first full build. And then also, just another perspective is that a lot of these industries aren't big enough. So if you're catering necessarily to the International Space Station, for most Silicon Valley investors, the opportunity there isn't hundreds of millions of dollars a year in revenue. So that's why we think that there's a lot of really interesting stuff going on in CubeSats and small sats, or telecom, and those are markets that venture guys can look at and say, I see how you could be a $1 billion company. And the problem with something like the International Space Station or a lot of the government contracts is, not only do you have to be a $1 billion company, you need to be there in less than 10 years. And so that's the kind of constraints that the ecosystem has. And if you guys have questions about it, I'm happy to answer them afterwards, but please come and find me. But that's, as I said, we get a couple applications a month from people who I find the technology is really exciting, really interesting, but there's $50 billion of capital kind of just up the street, and they have a very specific way of looking at the markets. And aerospace in general is something that they get excited about, they are really interested in, but they've got at the end of the day to be able to cram that into kind of the boxes that they've created. Thank you.
Jeremy, thanks very much. So I really appreciate the fact that all three of these gentlemen approached this topic, this question about incubators and the value thereof from completely different perspectives. But I think a unifying theme in everything we just heard is a nice sort of high-level insight into what an incubator is all about. So first of my two questions that I have for each of you, and I'd like to start with you and just go this way, is from the perspective of an individual new space entrepreneur, somebody in this room or somebody watching us over the internet walks into one of your incubators, why were these incubators created? What gaps did they fill? And what should that entrepreneur expect when they walk in the door? What kind of help should they expect that you provide that maybe they're not going to find anywhere else, or they can add to what they're finding anybody else? If you could each talk about that for a few minutes.
Yeah, sure. From the Silicon Valley Space Center perspective, I find it's more of an impedance matching. I don't see that in the aerospace industry we've got a great track record of building out aerospace companies. A lot of them come out of the defense industry, and I just don't think people understand how this startup and investment process works. So when people come to me, they usually say, well, here's pretty much, the formula that you need to follow. Number one is you've got to be thinking about something that's going to be a big market that's going to get people be excited about it. And then step through, what is your product offering associated with that, and then, how are you going to reach out to customers, and what are the economics of your model. Sometimes, from an aerospace perspective, you need to have novel thinking about problems. And one of the things I liked about Peter Plotcher's NanoSatisfy was Peter is building a program that interacts with a lot of people. So it's basically a shared time facility, and that a lot of people can engage those resources while they're in orbit. So they try and just sort of give a reality check for how your startup can be funded and can make those initial steps, much like what Jeremy was talking about. It's not going to be a $100 million seed round, but you're going to have to get started and then show some milestones along the way. And that's kind of the key for anybody.
Do you find that a lot of times that there's really a severe reality check that ends up occurring in those initial conversations, that they just totally had a misperception of how easy it might be or what the right path was?
It comes and goes. It comes and goes. I would say the half of them probably come in and there's probably not much you can do about it. But for the other half, I think they just need some help connecting with the reality of the situation here in Silicon Valley. And there is we're getting a lot of positive press on this, and that's improved over the last couple of years. And I just see events like the business plan competition help to advertise the possibilities. And most importantly, our industry, the aerospace industry, needs to get educated about the startup process.
And I think a lot of folks will agree with the last statement that you made. John, I'd like to turn to you. Same question. What should somebody expect walking in the door?
So I straddled two industries, the biotech industry and the space industry, and they both have real high capital at the beginning. So I think for those two industries, you need some sort of infrastructure in terms of hardware, in terms of equipment. But I think traditionally the incubator, it provided that kind of structure that startups needed, like a phone or a copier and a desk. And I think the internet has taken that requirement away. So Y Combinator doesn't provide office space. The startups can be anywhere. I've visited a few. We're just running out of multiple apartments joined together in Mountain View. So I think for our industries, it's very different from software industries. I think the biotech, you need equipment right away. There's a certain amount of virtualization and outsourcing you can do. There's a website called Science Exchange now where you can post your demands for experiments and they'll find people who can do them for you, and a very easy market for outsourcing of experiments. For space, again, if you're rolling up your sleeves and soldering, then you need some core infrastructure, and that can be expensive. I think a new model is coming, certainly for biotech and for pharmaceuticals. I'm mentoring a startup out of UCSF, and there's a new program run by Steve Blank. It's called Lean Launchpad for Biotech. And they're doing customer discovery, which is exactly the role that you said the incubator plays, where you come in and you meet with a mentor and they can maybe help you hit those dead ends earlier than you would otherwise. So I'm really impressed with that program. And there's a real scientific methodology. Steve's actually funded by the NSF to roll this program out, and it's how the NIH is going to be doing translational research. So it's Lean Launchpad, which people are familiar with in software, but it's now applying it to biotech, which nobody thought possible. But each week, each team's doing about 10 customer interviews. They have a hypothesis. They go in, they either validate it or invalidate it. If they validate it, they continue down that path of customer discovery. If they invalidate it, they pivot and they go somewhere else. So I think that's the new role of a incubator, is the mentorship and the structure that it can provide, but not just the physical infrastructure, but also some sort of methodology for customer discovery.
One of the last things that you mentioned, you talked about pivoting, right? And in my experience, I was having a conversation in the hallway with Dan Raskin. I'm sorry I forgot who else was part of that conversation, but it was Eva Janlock, I believe. That very same thing, that sometimes it's so easy to get locked into what that first plan is that you came up with when you're starting your company, and a month later, you're getting all this feedback from the universe and the marketplace telling you, pivot, pivot, feel the pull, and it's often ignored because you've got your head down, you're determined to stick with that plan that you've created. So I'm just glad to hear you make a comment about the importance of that. Jeremy, again, if I could turn to you.
Yeah, I've noticed we're not a high throughput group. We don't do fit classes or anything like that. We do about 10 to 15 investments a year, and our internal goal is that we're pretty hands-on. We want to spend 3 to 5 hours a week with companies in kind of all aspects. So in the early days, certainly focusing on customer discovery, also kind of dovetailing with that. As soon as someone comes in, we're talking about what milestone do you have to hit to raise the amount of money you think you need to get through that first year, that first 2 years, that first 3 years. But then also kind of, and this is where I think hardware caters particularly well to incubation, is we do design reviews, we do business reviews, we talk about systems engineering. So many of these companies, even if you identify the right problem to solve, it's 2 to 3 people. No one has the breadth of expertise they need to make sure that they're doing all the electrical and aero and mechanical things correctly. And what we find is that historically, some startups have failed because they just made a poor design choice in the first 6 months. And a year later, they realize they're screwed, but by then there's no turning back. Either you've already cut metal, or for consumer stuff, you're injection molding, or you're just too late in the design process to really unwind it with enough time to salvage the company. And so for us, a big value add we provide is bringing in sets of experts, doing the kind of adding the rigor that these companies need to succeed from day one.
Right, so a really powerful tool of mentorship is great. And I think what I'll do is save my other question for the end if we need to do so. At this point, I'd like to open it up and see if there are some questions from the audience for these gentlemen about incubators or anything in general regarding entrepreneurship. They clearly have a lot to offer.
While we're waiting for questions, I just want to come back to a point Jeremy made, which was that it depends on the model of the incubator. I know Lemnos Labs takes equity stake in the companies, so they're really vested in them succeeding. A lot of others, maybe like QB3 is state funded. It's more of a real estate play. It doesn't take equity in the companies. Alexandria Real Estate, it does. So I think there's a whole range of opportunities for the incubator to be incentivized to the success of the company. And it could be real estate, it could be equity.
So, very good. Oh, I'm sorry, that's you. Go ahead. Start.
Hi. As far as location, a lot of small businesses start out of their households right now, and I'm wondering how important you feel that separate location is for a business. I know that's a big deal.
It all depends on what you're doing. I mean, for a lot of aerospace stuff, most people don't have the facilities. So at Lemnos, we have a warehouse, and when Peter wanted to build a vacuum chamber, that was something we could help him with. And also, most people don't want to have a vacuum chamber kind of in their living room. I mean, we joked that the fabled Silicon Valley garage doesn't exist anymore because no entrepreneur could afford a place in Palo Alto with a garage. So I think that it really depends on who you are and what you're building. But I mean, we trying to remain as scrappy as possible, and if you can, or have the facilities to operate out of your house or your living room, for a lot of startups, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, in our case, we're located over at the Hacker Dojo, and to me, that's a very cost-effective place for entrepreneurs to get out of the house and go somewhere where they can actually do their work and sort of not bothered by whatever else may be going on at home, and then they can arrange meetings and bring other people together. And I think some of those facilities are just great places to get started. We ended up there after having gone over to Red Rock Coffee Shop in 2010 for a bunch of work we needed to do. And I'm like, hey, what's this Hacker Dojo space? And to me, it's a great facility that is now a new location in Mountain View. It's right across from NASA Ames. So if you need to get over to the space portal or people that are working in the research park, it's easily accessible.
Gentlemen, okay, he's not paying attention, so we'll give anything you guys.
So a question for you guys about sort of what criteria you look for when picking a company to be part of the incubator. Things like capital that they've already raised, or technology readiness level, or what kind of team, working prototype, just general idea. I mean, I'm sure it varies, depending on what the project is and what the incubator is, but sort of a baseline.
Yeah, for us, I mean, we want teams of 2 to 3 people. We like them engineering heavy, TRL 3, 4, depending on the industry is something we're very fine with, usually a duct tape prototype. And that's where we invest in. And as I said, we typically do about $100,000 checks. And so we have to see that you can get to a milestone with that. But we like to get the first money in. We're totally fine if you've never raised any money before.
I'd say same sort of thing, team experience. If it's biotech, then you need to see some wet lab experience. Or if it's space related, then I think again team and experience are the 2 critical ones.
Yeah, and on our end, as a scientist and engineer, definitely, my preference is for people that have some technical competence and understand the technology that they're marketing. But then, this is also a business, and you've got to be able to go out and market it. And so, how are you going to bring in the customers, and what do you know about the customers? And you can't diss the customers, and you can't diss the financial people. It's going to take a whole mix of people to make your company succeed. It's not just a few engineers, but it's a whole team effort. And so I like to see somebody who's able to work with a team. Either they bring those individuals on board, or you go out and find the right marketing person, or the right financial person. And some of that's kind of a networking opportunity. Good to have networking events that we have here in the Bay Area and San Francisco. Our space, if you follow the Space Startup Weekend formula, when you sell tickets, they don't all go to engineering people. They go to business people and marketing people and design people, because you're not in the engineering or science business. You're in the business of business, which is selling a product, making sure customers are happy, knowing what your customers want, and being able to listen to your customers. So I tend to look for companies where the ego is kind of checked at the door. Trying to deal with a real strong ego that doesn't want to listen to you about what you have to say, there's not much you can do about that. And you've got to, I really like the Steve Blank model and the lean startup, where you've got a whole bunch of, and from the science side you can understand that you've got a whole bunch of assumptions about your business, and you've got to go in and start testing those assumptions as quickly as possible. And that's, given an initial seed money, or even prior to, just running out of friends and family.
I'd love to hear you talk about ego, because that is absolutely one of the big killers of startups, especially sometimes the founder who's convinced. I've been involved in 2 situations like that. Absolutely convinced that person knows what to do all the time. Asks for advice, but isn't really interested in it. It was George. Was it you that you? Greg, I'm sorry, I apologize.
I still don't have a mic, but I do without it, right? I have a question for you. I mean, Jeremy, we're pretty eloquent in explaining that space business is different from IT, for example, by the capital intensity that it requires. Don't you think that it does create a very unique and very large opportunity to NASA Center, who are complaining about the decrease of their manufacturing side work, to actually put their facility and equipment, heavy equipment, extremely expensive, already paid for, to use for startups who cannot afford to build their own from scratch? Don't you think that Incubator have a very great opportunity to actually make the connection between the startups that need it and have no way of building it because the funding requirement is just incredible, and on the other hand, NASA, which has all these assets on hand and are not necessarily using them?
Absolutely. I mean, with one of our startups right now, we're actually, they came to us and they said, we really need a wind tunnel. And so we went through our network. We actually, with NASA Ames, you can use something like a Space Act agreement. But what we actually found is that for the timeline they needed, the NASA probably couldn't meet that timeline. And so we actually found a contact at UW. And so we're currently pretty late negotiations with them to have them spin up and start to use a wind tunnel. And that's certainly, from my perspective, that's something that I do. And that's, I think, as for any incubator, it's like, for any given startup founder, you look at what do they take time doing, and anytime you can shorten that, great. And so for us, part of that thing is like knowing who to go to for investment, but also specific facilities, and then also the ability for us to really negotiate with them and say, hey, we can bring you 1 to 2 deals like this a year, or 1 to 2 customers, because they're always looking to prorate, especially at places like NASA where the overhead can be kind of crushing at times.
I think you need to know where the dark fiber is in the industry and where are the resources to take advantage of. When you look at the NASA resources, many of those resources, the top priority are NASA programs that, you could be set up to use that facility, and if a NASA program comes in, it's going to get top billing because that's what a NASA center is for. The NASA center is there to do NASA's business, as directed by headquarters or directed by various research projects that are assigned at the center. So, you can, I think Dan Rasky is here. NASA Ames has tremendous facilities, both hardware, software, and wetware, both on the wind tunnels, laboratory facilities, but then also in terms of the expertise that they have. And if you can get that to work for you, then that works well. And some of that's based on personal relationships, and I think that's what an incubator really brings is the network. You've got a Rolodex. Here are the people I know. Let me help you with establishing some connections and ease the on-ramp for introductions and to make stuff happen.
Any other questions, please?
Can you guys talk a little bit about any kind of active seeking you do of startups to bring into your organizations?
I run an activity hub called SynBio Beta outside of my NASA activities, and it keeps me in touch with new technology. It keeps me in touch with startups. So we have a big conference coming up in Mission Bay in San Francisco on the 15th of next month, and we bring together, the role that I play is facilitating synthetic biology startup companies and investors. So that's mainly what the conference is about. And then throughout the year, we run smaller satellite events, like we're starting a SynBio Beta Founders Happy Hour in December, just to try and bring together new founders of new companies, and we run a digest and training courses.
Yeah, for us, we do a lot of the same stuff. I mean, at the stage we invest in, sometimes if you wait till you hear about them, you kind of have to have the presence that they'll come find you. And so for us, we do a series of happy hours, we do hackathons and things of that nature, and that's the best way to kind of get the word out about us.
Yeah, absolutely. That's we do a series of tech talks with the AIAA. We hold those at the Hacker Dojo. We do them on a monthly basis, and I'd say I use that as a venue for bringing in people to talk about what they're doing and have a discussion. Early on, we had Peter Plotzer, we had Tim Benedictus from SkyCube, we had Zach Manchester from his KickSat effort, and you just got to have your ear to the ground. With any incubator, you're really looking for, quote, the new thing. And so any networking events that you go to, certainly go to alumni events and talk to people. I interact with John and Jeremy for the events that they hold. I'm always looking for, where can we connect up good ideas as startups and then in the space area.
Any more questions?
Thank you. So I'm looking from the perspective of an incubator as a business model where you're bringing businesses in, but then you're taking either real estate or, for instance, a portion of their company to help fund yourself. Seeing how that's the risk that you're taking. Have you ever come to a situation where you find that you're low in resources to maintain, you're low in capital to maintain the resources that you're offering to your companies, where you need to go to find either outside partners or investors to come in to keep the incubator going?
So actually, for us, we're a venture capital fund, so we have outside investors, and we just have an ops budget on top of that. So when we invest the money, we take equity. So that's explicitly the model. For us, as a venture capital fund, you're expecting to pay off over a 10-year period, so you get a management fee to just run ops, and that's how that works for us. But there's lots of different models.
Yeah, on our model, we take an equity share in the companies and then participate in their early stage angel rounds on this, and just work through various other activities that we do to keep the doors open.
Any other questions? We have time for maybe one or two more. All right, I'll go ahead and close out then with the second question I was thinking about. And really flipping the coin from the first question I asked you, I imagine each of you can think of scenarios where people walk in with the wrong expectations. So what should an entrepreneur not expect to find from each of your incubators in general? What kind of support should they not be looking to in an incubator? There is an answer to that question.
They shouldn't be looking for cotton wool. One of the criticisms of incubators is that they provide too much protection, and that it takes longer for the startup to really hit the ground because they're being protected a little bit by a nice desk and a happy hour and a coffee machine. And I was chatting with Mark Bonger, who's one of the mentors for one of the teams here with Lux Research, talking about what we're going to talk about in this panel. And he said, a ship is safe in the harbor, but that's not what a ship is for. I thought that was a nice analogy.
Yeah.
So they shouldn't expect too much comfort.
No, it's interesting.
No. I just, I'm always willing to talk to people, but you've got to come with your ideas and be ready to hit the road and start doing some work on this. I have a hard time when people say, "Hey, I'd like to do a startup. Tell me what I should be doing." Sometimes I usually sit down and ask people, "Well, what are your interests?" Because unless you're really passionate about something, then you're kind of not going to go anywhere. So when people come in and they say to me, "Gee, I'm not quite too sure what I should be doing," then I usually just take time with them to sit down and say, "Well, what are the things that you'd like to do? What are the things that you're interested in doing? What are your kind of hobbies and other activities?" And see how you can kind of engage that to create a startup environment, a startup. But in terms of just handing somebody, "Oh, look, here's a magic formula. Why don't you go do this?" And it's kind of independent of who that individual is. You're not going to get that, and you're not going to get just a ton of my time just jawboning about stuff that ain't true, and that there is a due diligence phase on this. So you're just, it's either up or out.
And I think for us, occasionally we run into problems where people think that we do the engineering as the hardware incubator, and so for us, we're not going to do the CAD for you or things like that. We need people who I can spend 2 hours with, and we talk about product market fit and discuss the feature set of a product, but then they're the one that either goes and verifies it, or they're the ones who runs through it and builds the first couple iterations. We're not we don't, we've never made investments 2 MBAs just because that's not our model. Our model is we need people in teams that are balanced but engineering heavy to really be able to execute on the stuff that we talk through.
John, anything else you want to add? Gentlemen, you know, sitting in these chairs, I feel like we should sit here and wait for our cigars and brandy. But if you would please put your hands together and thank Sean, John, I presume it will be Henning or David that will be coming up, or not. So my understanding from looking at the agenda is we'll take a break, and then the next thing we will have is the judges will be announcing the winners, and there'll be an awards presentation. Tom, do I have that right? Anything you want to come up and say at this point?
No.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right. Then the break has begun. Thank you all.
Yeah.